Have you ever found yourself in a conversation, in a relationship, in a moment so subtly charged that the air itself seems to thicken with unspoken rules? Have you ever agreed to a seemingly innocent request, a small favor born of affection, only to feel a strange, almost imperceptible shift in the balance of power, a quiet tightening of a leash you never knew was there? Many people believe that manipulation is a game of grand gestures, of overt threats and loud demands. They look for the obvious signs, the cinematic red flags, and in doing so, they miss the true artistry of the psychological predator. The reality is far more insidious, far more elegant in its cruelty. It operates not in the light of conflict, but in the shadows of intimacy, disguised as love, masked as care, and delivered in the form of 7 seemingly benevolent requests. This is not a story about simple disagreements or toxic relationships as the world understands them. This is a descent into the architecture of control, a journey into a labyrinth where every corridor is designed to lead you away from yourself. And to navigate it, to truly understand the game being played upon the soul, we must turn to the master cartographer of the psyche, the one who dared to map the treacherous landscapes of the unconscious, Carl Jung. Jung gave us a language for the things we feel but cannot name. He spoke of the shadow, that disowned, repressed part of ourselves that holds everything we cannot accept. Our insecurities, our fears, our deepest shames, and our unfulfilled lust for power. A psychologically whole individual, he argued, is one who has the courage to turn and face their own shadow, to integrate its darkness into the light of consciousness. But the manipulator, the unconscious man or woman desperate for control, does the opposite. They refuse to look inward. They cannot bear the weight of their own emptiness, their own terror of abandonment, their own gnawing inadequacy. And so, they perform a sinister kind of psychological alchemy. They project their shadow onto another. They find a target, a vessel, and they begin the slow, methodical process of convincing that person that the darkness they feel is not theirs, but yours. This projection is the engine of the entire game. And the 7 requests, they are the gears of that engine, each one a carefully calibrated tool designed to dismantle your autonomy, to erode your reality, and to make you the unwitting custodian of a darkness that was never yours to carry. What follows is not merely a list. It is a decoding. It is an unveiling of the hidden motives behind each demand, a journey into the mind of a woman who learned to stop playing the game and started to see the board for what it was. And for those of you with the courage to listen, stay until the very end, because the 7th and final request is the most devastating of all. It is the manipulator's checkmate, the move that seeks not just to control you, but to annihilate you completely. Before the awakening, this woman was not weak. She was, in fact, profoundly strong in a way the world often mistakes for naivete. She possessed an open heart, a belief in the inherent goodness of people, a willingness to extend trust as a gift rather than a reward. She operated from a place of wholeness, assuming others did the same. She confused intensity with intimacy, possession with passion. When a man entered her life and mirrored her own depth, she saw a soulmate. She didn't see a void seeking to be filled, a shadow seeking a screen onto which it could project its phantoms. She lived in a state of unconscious grace, unaware that her very light was what attracted the darkness. She was the kind of woman who gave the benefit of the doubt until it bankrupted her emotionally. She would hear a phrase like, "All my exes were crazy," and feel a surge of compassion, a desire to be the one who could finally heal him, not recognizing it for the glaring red flag it was. The confession of a man who leaves a trail of psychological wreckage wherever he goes, a man who has never once looked at the common denominator in all his failed relationships, himself. She was a fixer, a nurturer, a believer. These were her greatest strengths, and in the hands of a manipulator, they were about to be weaponized against her, turned into the very instruments of her own confinement. She entered the labyrinth willingly, believing it was a temple of love, never suspecting that the minotaur at its center was feeding on the slow erosion of her sanity. The transformation, the awakening, did not arrive like a lightning bolt. It was a slow, creeping dawn of horror. It was 1,000 tiny paper cuts to the soul until she finally began to bleed. It was the moment when the pattern became undeniable, when the series of coincidences and misunderstandings began to form a coherent, terrifying mosaic. The pain eventually became so constant, so profound, that it stopped being just pain and started becoming information. It was the agonizing process Jung called individuation, the journey of becoming a complete, self-aware individual separate from the collective unconscious and, most painfully, separate from the projections of others. To do this, she had to descend. She had to walk willingly into the hell of her own story, to face the ghosts of her past compliances, to sit with the shame of her own unknowing participation. She had to stop looking at him for answers and turn her gaze inward, into the wreckage he had created inside her. She began to ask not, "Why is he doing this to me?" but a far more powerful question. Why have I allowed this? What part of me resonates with this control? What unhealed wound in me finds this possession familiar? This was the turning point. It was the moment she stopped being a victim of the game and started becoming a student of it. She picked up the discarded pieces of her own intuition, her own judgment, her own perception, and began the grueling work of reassembling herself, not as she was before, but as something new, something forged in fire, something unbreakable. And so, the first request. It always begins with a request that sounds like the purest form of romance, the ultimate compliment. It arrives shrouded in the language of devotion. It's just that I want you all to myself. When we're with your friends, I feel like I have to share you, and honestly, no one else understands you the way I do on the surface. This is a declaration of profound connection, a testament to a love so special it creates its own exclusive world. The unsuspecting heart swoons. She feels chosen, prioritized, elevated above the mundane friendships of her past. She begins to politely decline invitations, to create distance from her support system, believing she is nurturing this extraordinary bond. But let us decode this with a Jungian lens. This is not about love. It is about control. This is the first move in a strategy of isolation. The manipulator's shadow is screaming with insecurity, with a terror of comparison and a deep-seated fear of abandonment. He projects this terror onto her support system, framing them as a threat. By convincing her that his perception is the only one that matters, he slowly, methodically severs her lifelines. Friends and family are the mirrors that reflect our true selves back to us. They are the anchors to our own reality. By removing them, the manipulator ensures that his mirror is the only one she looks into, a distorted mirror that will soon reflect back only what he wants her to see. The awakened woman, the woman who has done her inner work, hears this request and a silent alarm sounds. She understands that a man who is whole, who is confident in his own worth, wants to be a part of her world, not to subtract her from it. He would want to meet the people who shaped her, to celebrate the connections that sustain her. She recognizes this request not as a compliment, but as the first brick in the wall of a prison cell. And her response is no longer an accommodating apology. It is a simple, calm, and unshakable boundary. Her peace is non-negotiable, and her world is not for sale. Then comes the second request, a subtle encroachment on her very form, her physical expression in the world. It is disguised as aesthetic appreciation, as a personal preference wrapped in the ribbon of a compliment. I just love it when you wear that blue dress. You look so much better with your hair long. You do it for me, right? It makes me happy to see you like that. Again, the surface logic is appealing. What is the harm in pleasing the person you love? Feels like a small act of service, a simple way to bring him joy. She might change her style, let her hair grow, slowly editing her appearance to match his desires, feeling a sense of pride in her ability to please him. But the psychological undercurrent is far more sinister. This is not about a dress or a hairstyle. This is about ownership. The manipulator's shadow contains a deep objectification of others. It sees people not as sovereign beings, but as accessories to its own ego. By controlling her appearance, he is subtly transforming her from a subject into an object. She is becoming an extension of his will, a walking testament to his influence. He is curating her, turning her into a piece of art that reflects his taste, his status, his control. Jung would see this as a profound act of soul murder. It is the beginning of the erasure of her identity. The awakened woman hears this request and understands its true meaning. She knows that her body, her style, her physical form is the sacred temple of her own spirit. It is not a canvas for another's ego. She recognizes that a partner who truly loves her would celebrate her self-expression, not seek to mold it. His attraction would be to her essence, not to his ability to edit her. Her response is therefore not one of defiance, but of simple, powerful self-possession. She dresses for herself. She wears her hair for herself. She exists for herself. And she observes, with chilling clarity, the flicker of rage in his eyes when his request for control is met with the quiet thunder of her autonomy. The third request is perhaps the most insidious of all, for it does not target her friends or her appearance, but the very foundation of her reality, her mind. It is not always a direct request, but a persistent, creeping suggestion, a campaign of subtle psychological warfare. It sounds like this: "Are you sure you remember that correctly? You're being a little emotional right now. I think it's clouding your judgment. That's not how it happened. You're exaggerating. This is gaslighting." A term now common but whose devastating impact is still underestimated. On the surface, he appears concerned, rational, the calm anchor in her sea of supposed emotionality. He positions himself as the objective arbiter of reality. She begins to doubt her own memory, her own perceptions, her own feelings. She starts to believe that perhaps she is too sensitive, too irrational, that her emotional responses are invalid and untrustworthy. This is the manipulator's shadow in its most cowardly form. Unable to take responsibility for his own actions or words, he projects his deceitfulness onto her, framing her as the one who is confused or dishonest. He creates a fog so thick that she can no longer trust the ground beneath her own feet. He is attacking the root of her sovereignty, her ability to trust herself. The woman who is awakening to this game feels the familiar chill of this tactic. But now she does not internalize the doubt. She recognizes it as an external attack. She learns to hold onto her own perception with a white-knuckled grip. When he says, "That's not what happened," she learns to reply, not with an argument, but with a quiet, internal, and eventually external declaration. "That is what I experienced. My perception is valid." She becomes a lighthouse in his manufactured fog. She understands that the goal of gaslighting is to make her question her sanity, and her most radical act of rebellion is to calmly and resolutely believe herself. This act alone begins to dismantle his entire reality tunnel, and it terrifies him. With her reality under assault, the fourth request arrives to test the new, fractured foundation. It is a direct challenge, an emotional ultimatum disguised as a plea for proof of love. "If you really loved me, you would quit that art class. If you really cared about us, you wouldn't go on that trip with your sister. If you put me first, you would understand this is a loyalty test, a blatant move to establish a transactional dynamic where love is not a state of being, but a commodity to be earned through sacrifice." The surface logic preys on her deepest fears of not being a good partner, of being selfish. She is placed in an impossible position. Either she sacrifices a piece of her own life, her own joy, her own growth, to prove her love, or she holds on to it and is branded as unloving and uncaring. This is where the manipulator's shadow reveals its parasitic nature. It cannot generate its own life force, its own joy, so it must feed on the joy of others. Her ambition, her passions, her connections, anything that gives her a source of energy independent of him, is perceived as a direct threat. By demanding she sacrifice these things, he is not asking for her love. He is demanding her energy, her very life force. He is ensuring that he remains the sole source of her validation and her existence. The awakened woman sees this for the spiritual blackmail it is. She has learned, through painful experience, that love does not demand amputation. True love, authentic connection, is expansionary. A partner who loves her would be the one cheering her on at her art class, excited for her to have new experiences, proud of her independent growth. He would understand that her fullness does not diminish him. It enriches the space between them. She realizes that any love that requires her to become smaller is not love at all. It is a cage, and she calmly, deliberately, refuses to hand over the keys to her own life. Her no is not an act of war, but an act of profound self-love. The fifth request follows logically from the fourth. Having attempted to curtail her external world, the manipulator now turns his focus to her internal world, to her very thoughts and vulnerabilities. This request sounds like the ultimate form of trust and intimacy. Tell me everything. There should be no secrets between us. Tell me your deepest fears, your past traumas, every dark thought you've ever had. It is presented as the creation of a sacred, shared space where all walls are down. To the woman who craves deep connection, this is an irresistible invitation. She bares her soul, believing she is forging an unbreakable bond of trust. She confesses her insecurities, her childhood wounds, her moments of shame, feeling a profound sense of relief and closeness. She has handed him the keys to the innermost chambers of her psyche. But this is a Trojan horse. From a Jungian perspective, the manipulator is not seeking connection. He is gathering intelligence. He is collecting ammunition. His shadow is that of a predator, and he needs to know his prey's weaknesses to maintain control. Every vulnerability she shares will be catalogued, stored, and later deployed against her in moments of conflict. Her fear of being abandoned will be used to justify his possessiveness. Her past trauma will be used to prove she is damaged, and unstable. Her insecurities will be subtly poked and prodded to keep her off balance and dependent on his approval. The awakened woman understands this terrifying dynamic. She learns the critical difference between intimacy and exposure. Intimacy is earned, built over time through consistent acts of trustworthiness and mutual respect. It is a reciprocal sharing of strength, not a one-sided excavation of weakness. She learns that her inner world is sacred ground. She does not owe anyone access to it. She becomes discerning. She learns that true safety is not found in revealing every weakness to another, but in building the internal strength to hold and heal those weaknesses herself. She shares her soul's treasures only with those who have proven they know how to handle sacred things. The sixth request feels like the culmination of all the others, the moment the game escalates into a direct assault on her character. It often comes after she has begun to pull away, to set boundaries, to reclaim pieces of herself. It is a distorted reflection, a dark and twisted accusation. Why are you being so secretive? You're the one who is manipulative. You're trying to control me by pulling away. Here, the projection is at its most blatant, its most desperate. As she reclaims her autonomy, the manipulator's shadow self is thrown back in his own face, and he cannot bear to look at it. The emptiness he tried to fill with her, the insecurity he tried to soothe with her compliance, the chaos in his own soul he tried to manage by controlling her. It all comes rushing back. In a frantic act of psychological self-preservation, he accuses her of being the very thing he is. He projects his own manipulative behavior onto her act of self-preservation. Her boundaries are framed as control. Her need for privacy is framed as secrecy. Her emotional withdrawal is framed as manipulation. This is the moment the line between victim and perpetrator can feel terrifyingly blurry to the outside world, and even, for a moment, to her. His accusations are delivered with such conviction, such pained sincerity, that she might falter, wondering if he is right. Is her newfound strength actually a form of cruelty? Is her independence a selfish act of punishment? This is his last-ditch effort to drag her back into the fog, to make her doubt her awakening itself. But the woman who has truly done the work, who has faced her own shadow, now possesses a clarity that cannot be so easily shaken. She can see his projection for what it is, a desperate tantrum of the ego losing its grip. She does not engage. She does not defend. She does not argue. To argue is to re-enter the game on his terms. Instead, she holds her ground with a quiet, powerful stillness. She has seen the truth, and his attempts to rewrite it are now just noise. She understands that his accusations are not a reflection of her character, but a confession of his own. And now, the seventh and final request. It is the most dangerous because it sounds like the most beautiful, the most transcendent promise of all. It is the ultimate goal of the narcissistic shadow. The request is for a complete merger, a total dissolution of boundaries. It sounds like this: we don't need two bank accounts, two sets of friends, two separate lives. Let's become one. What's mine is yours, and what's yours is mine. There should be no you or me, only us. This is presented as the pinnacle of romantic and spiritual union, the alchemical wedding of two souls. It is the fairy tale ending, the happily ever after, the ultimate refutation of loneliness. To the woman who has been conditioned to believe that her value lies in her connection to a partner, this is the Holy Grail. She may willingly dissolve her financial independence, her individual identity, her personal autonomy, into the great, consuming entity of us, but Jung would issue a chilling warning here. This is not individuation. This is not sacred union. This is annihilation. The manipulator's shadow is a black hole. Its ultimate desire is not to partner with the light, but to consume it entirely. By erasing the boundaries between you and me, he ensures that only he remains, expanded and fed by the husk of her former self. He absorbs her resources, her identity, her very essence, until she is nothing but a ghost living inside his reality. This is the checkmate. It is a psychological murder-suicide, where he kills her soul to avoid facing his own. The woman who is fully awake, who has navigated the previous 6 stages of this horrifying labyrinth, recognizes this final request for the death sentence it is. She understands the most profound spiritual paradox. True union can only happen between two whole, separate, and sovereign individuals. It is not a melting into one, but a standing together, side by side, two complete pillars holding up the sacred space between them. She knows that the ultimate act of love she can offer the world, and any potential partner, is her own wholeness. And so, she rejects the merger. She chooses herself, not out of selfishness, but out of a sacred duty to the life force that animates her. She chooses her own name, her own bank account, her own thoughts, her own soul. And in this final, powerful refusal, she steps out of the labyrinth for good, not as a victim who escaped, but as a sovereign queen who refused to abdicate her own throne. This transformed woman is now a force that the world does not quite know how to handle. She makes people uncomfortable. She radiates a presence that is not needy, not seeking, not asking for completion. It is a state of being that is whole unto itself. She awakens two extremes in those she encounters: profound admiration and visceral fear. To those who are also on the path of individuation, she is a beacon, a testament to the possibility of reclaiming one's own soul. They are drawn to her clarity, her quiet strength, her authenticity. But to those who still live in the world of halves, of projections, of unconscious games, the manipulators and the willingly manipulated alike, she is a terrifying anomaly. She shatters the logic of control. Her refusal to need them is perceived as a judgment. Her self-possession is interpreted as arrogance. Her silence is read as a threat. They cannot find a hook, a crack, a vulnerability to exploit, and this drives them to distraction. They will call her cold, difficult, picky. They will say she has built walls around her heart. But she knows the truth. It is not a wall. It is a boundary. A wall is built from fear to keep everyone out. A boundary is built from love to let the right people in. She has simply raised the price of admission to her life, and the currency is no longer compliance or sacrifice. The currency is wholeness, reciprocity, and respect. She navigates a world that still preaches that happily ever after only exists in pairs, and she does so with an almost ironic smile, for she has discovered a love affair far more profound, the one with her own integrated, sovereign self. The love that may come next for her will not be a rescue. It will not be a salvation. It will be a celebration, a meeting of two kings and queens, not two beggars hoping the other has a crust of bread. So what is the final state of this woman who has decoded the 7 requests and reclaimed her psyche? It is peace, not the peace of emptiness, but the peace of presence. It is a quiet, powerful hum beneath the surface of her life, a deep knowing that she is her own anchor, her own harbor. She has faced the manipulator's shadow, but more importantly, she has faced her own. She has acknowledged the part of her that was willing to be controlled, the part that craved validation so intensely it would trade its own freedom for it. By integrating that shadow, by healing that wound, she has removed the hook. There is nothing for the manipulator's projection to latch onto anymore. She has learned that the line between victim and manipulator is not about becoming one, but about understanding the mechanics of both. She understands the desperation of the manipulator's shadow so intimately that she feels a kind of detached compassion for it, the way a doctor might feel compassion for a virus she has learned to cure in herself. Her power is not in fighting, but in seeing. Her strength is not in resisting, but in non-participation. She has exited the game entirely. She has learned that her attention is her most valuable resource, and she no longer gives it away to those who would use it to diminish her. She has made a pact with her own soul, a sacred vow to never again abandon herself, to never again accept a love that requires her to be less. This journey was never about him. It was never about escaping a monster. It was about her returning to herself. It was about answering the most important call she would ever receive, the call to come home. If this story, this decoding, has touched something inside of you, it is not an accident. If the echo of these 7 requests feels hauntingly familiar, if a whisper in your own soul has been trying to warn you, then perhaps this message found you for a reason. This journey of awakening, of reclaiming your psychological sovereignty, is not just the story of an archetype. It is the birthright of every individual who feels they have lost themselves in the reflection of another's eyes. The path is not easy. It requires a brutal honesty, a courageous descent into your own shadows, and a willingness to stand alone in your own truth, even when the world calls you crazy. But the freedom that waits on the other side is the only freedom that truly matters. It is the freedom to be unapologetically and wholly yourself. If this message resonated, let it be more than a passive experience. Let it be the beginning of a conscious choice. Share this video, not as a simple click, but as an act of spreading light into the shadowed corners of other people's lives. Like it as a vote for clarity over confusion. And subscribe to this channel to continue this journey of deep learning and self-reclamation together. Most importantly, share your own response in the comments below. Have you encountered one of these 7 requests? Which one resonated the most deeply with your own experience? By sharing your story, you reclaim its power, and you help to build a community of awareness that is, in itself, a fortress against manipulation. This is not just about watching a video. This is about starting a revolution, one sovereign soul at a time.